I want to change your perception about every bite of food that you bring to your lips. I want to convince you that your brain is not entirely where you think it is. And I want to teach you that flavor is, in fact, the linchpin for our very evolution. As a culinary historian, storyteller, and the host of a public television show about food, I spend a great deal of time thinking about how it affects us and changes us. So I want to begin with a story. 15 years ago, an acquaintance of mine pulled dutifully up to a four-way stop, scanned for traffic, and eased forward, unaware until the moment of impact that a distracted teenager in his mom's dented Pontiac would forever change the course of her life. Now, the accident wasn't bad by most standards, minor even, bruises, whiplash. And it wasn't until she returned home later that evening from the hospital that she realized that something was different, something was off. The food at dinner that night tasted muted and gravelly. Now, she had been an editor for the Associated Press, so she always had this superior vocabulary, yet she struggled to describe what was happening. It wasn't until breakfast the next morning when she realized with mounting apprehension what had occurred. She had lost her sense of taste. The impact from the airbags had damaged the nerves that controlled her ability to smell, thus disqualifying her ability to taste. Take a moment and imagine your own lives without flavor. That great pasta dish that you love is now rubbery strings tossed in a viscous glue. An exquisite glass of wine to pair with the pasta is now ruby-colored paint water. Chocolate cake on your birthday is brown sponge with thick paste. Now, an injury like this has a name. It's called anosmia, and it's generally irreversible. It ought to be, however, a free pass to eat more healthily. Kale, chocolate chip cookies, now on a level playing field. However, that wasn't the case. Through the years, she wasn't eating for pleasure. She was eating in pursuit of flavor memories, terrified that those that were the most meaningful would fade from memory. The cloying sweet tang of fresh lemonade, the delicate pine-like hint of rosemary, the soft, grain-emblazoned richness of fresh bread. The truth is that when we eat, it isn't for calories and nutrition, but as a reminiscence of our past, as a deeply present echo with our memories. Emotions, identity, memories are all linked to it. Tell me one significant human experience, either of celebration or despair, that isn't honored by food and drink. So, how did this come to be? Well, it's generally agreed by anthropologists that when we started to cook, physiology changed too. When you cook meat, a whole host, this myriad of chemical reactions happen, and it's easier to eat, and yes, it just tastes better. This can't be underscored. 100% of cooked food is metabolized versus only 30 to 40% of raw. Our stomachs became smaller and our brains became larger. Now, brain matter is calorically expensive. We started cooking roughly around 1.8 million years ago, and for the next 600,000, we had calories to spend. When we cooked, we gathered around food. In that experience, we began to imprint. Our early primitive brains started to remember warmth, community, nourishment, relative safety, which lowers stress. It was all stored in a part of the brain that we now call the flavor cortex. Now, our next leap was from meat to wheat. We had consumed carbs before, lots of them, but always in the raw. And the difficulty with raw food is the time that it takes to digest it is equal to the energy that it takes to do so. Early grains like einkorn and emmer were crushed, mixed with water, shaped and baked into the first unleavened breads. These breads gave us wild amounts of energy. Our brains, which grow from the back to the front, develop this gorgeous prefrontal cortex. With it, we reasoned and we imagined differently. We could better manage our fight and flight response. Subtle thought waves developed, emotions, speech. We drew, we danced, we built differently than we literally had ever done before. Now, the trouble with wheat and grains is that they grow in one place. We had been hunter-gatherers up until this point, and cities, well, first villages, and then cities evolved because that's where the wheat was. There's even a theory that our early religiosity, our spirituality, came forth from our prefrontal cortex's need to describe the mystery of why one harvest was better than the other. Not all of us stayed put with these new brains and these portable breads. Some of us went on a road trip. In 180,000 years, the human footprint expanded from Central Africa through Europe, across Asia, and down to the southern tip of South America. Or put it this way, the oldest carved art that we have in ancient Egypt is newer than the skulls and spearheads that are found in the lower region of South America. Now, to get to the root of how flavor affects us, I have to get a little sciencey. Don't worry, this is exciting stuff. Our first awareness of nutrition and flavor ideally comes just moments outside of the womb. Breast milk is sweet. We are millions of years programmed to crave, to want sweet, fat, and starchy carbs. Later, we discover that poisons are typically bitter. Taste evolved to give us gratification for the food that evolved us. Cooking opened us up to better tastes. In pursuit of better tastes, we discovered flavor. Because of what we eat, we quite literally are. So if there are any philosophers in the audience, I will see you one René Descartes, and I will raise you a hamburger. This is a graph of our tongue. It's how we think it worked until 1971. Just 5 spots to taste everything: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and that rogue umami. This was the accepted science, and many of you were probably acquainted with it in middle school. It was even embraced by the James Beard Foundation, which is sort of a living Smithsonian of American cuisine. I don't fault them. It was the best science that we had at the time. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. What about cinnamon? When I think of cinnamon, it's as a scent, not a taste, but I know it as a flavor. What we now know is that taste buds encompass the entirety of our mouths and our throats. That when we smell, it isn't just through our noses, but in the back of our throats. The very act of swallowing pushes scent up into our noses and back into our throats. When we eat, it isn't just 5 receptors pushing it all around and some mishigas of hope this tastes good. It's this great awareness. Scent and flavor are 2 inputs for one function. Even better yet, if you have ever had a gut feeling, you are being scientifically literal. Our guts are inhabited by trillions of microorganisms, good bacteria. 1/3 of them is common to all of us. The rest is entirely unique to each one of us. Our first introduction to this bacteria is, you guessed it, through breastfeeding. They work symbiotically with us. They adjust themselves based on what we eat for optimal health. Even More fascinatingly, they send constant feedback signals to our thinking center, the brain, on how we're doing and how we're feeling. What I find even more exciting is this beauty, the vagus nerve. Now, we've heard about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nerve. Those keep our eyes blinking and our hearts beating, and those are all important. The vagus nerve sends 100 million tendrils down to embrace our gut. In concert with the good bacteria, it sends a constant relay to our brain about the food that we eat. Together, they are now beginning to be called the second brain, which is not far off from the truth when you think about how the tissue for the vagus nerve and the tissue for our brains grow from the same tissue initially in utero. When we eat, this amazing fireworks of anticipation goes off in our brain, and our mouths, and our throats, and our stomachs. First, dopamine comes in. It's sort of the opening band for pleasure. Then scent, shapes, color report. Then the tactile experience, right? The crunchiness, the mouthfeel, the velvety soft, whatever it is. And then last but not least, the taste buds report. The whole thing is like this grand symphony, its instruments coming together. The whole thing is more than the sum of its parts. The symphony, the music, the imprint is flavor. You see, the way that we experience flavor need not even be through something we eat. 2 autumns ago, I climbed the stairs of the townhome that I share with my wife and our children and our pets. I passed the piano that she and the children are apt to play capriciously, our living room sofas, the dining room table spotted with homework, and our water pitcher and a sweatshirt folded over a chair, and on into the kitchen, where in the center island sat a singular white piece of paper with elegant handwriting elucidating a loved, often requested, now legendary recipe. The ingredients listed in my mother's exquisite cursive, which was shaped by a childhood in Europe and then as a World War II refugee, which was shaped by her deep, abiding embrace of American cuisine as a form of assimilation, and then shaped by a later life, which was saddled with depression that ended when she was 58 and I was 27. That recipe, which was shared on holidays and birthdays and homecomings and with new neighbors and as a culinary balm for life's darker turns, that recipe I could taste in my mouth, in my mind, in my being. That recipe embodied everything that nurturing and constancy in Mom is. Now, I know it was just a series of electrochemicals flashing around in my brain, but for me it was something more transcendent. It was more than fact. It was deep flavor. The woman in the first story will indelibly be chasing memories through flavor. We all still have that privilege, if you consider flavor a privilege as I do from an evolutionary standpoint. If with every privilege comes a responsibility, then when we choose the birthday cake from the grocery store instead of one that we made from scratch, the steak from the national chain instead of one from our own grill, the can of soup instead of one from our own stock, we choose and we imprint. When you eat someone else's cooking, you incorporate some of their flavor memories. For the first time in America in 2015, we spent more on dining out, roughly $54 billion, than we did on groceries, roughly $52 billion. So, if with every privilege comes a responsibility, please don't get me wrong, I adore the craft and sometimes art of chefs. I think it is an access point to flavors that we simply don't have the availability to get in our own kitchens. I think at its very best, at its height, it is a form of alchemy. But I urge each one of you to walk in the path of our very evolution, to cook daily. You see, I believe that some meals are more than just a pleasant accumulation of nutrients and calories. I believe they are a metaphysical pathway that led us out of the cradle of civilization and to the very core of who we are. Thank you.